Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the videos you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like, because the purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues and any issues related to those issues. A hearty shout out to the Rabyd Nation. Join the nation by hitting that subscribe button, and if you want to become a paying full citizen of the nation, make sure that you hit that join button. I would always appreciate the support, and my citizens get a few extra perks and bonuses along the way. Today I want to continue on Tuesday Bible studies. Remember, I just did one last week on when God kills, and this week I'm talking about the book of Acts. I'm going to title this one Tongues of Fire, Acts and the Pentecostals, and I'm going to talk more about how the book of Acts relates to Pentecostalism, what I learned when I was a Pentecostal preacher. So I'm going to rotate those two. I still haven't gotten a third one of your choice, so I'm still waiting for somebody to make a comment or a mention of a passage or chapter or something that you want me to take a look at. If that doesn't happen, then I will rotate back to when God kills next week, and we'll see what happens. But you're always free to make a suggestion, and I will try to get that suggestion in there in the right spot. Today, though, I want to do an introduction to the book of Acts, mostly because the Gospels are always pretty familiar to people, but the book of Acts almost seems like a secondary thing, but it is part of church history, supposedly. Okay. Basically, Acts is volume 2 of a 2-volume set. If you take Luke and Acts and you were to read them both straight through, you would be reading volume 1 and volume 2 of this author who collected these stories, first about the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then, of course, the Acts of the Apostles. The writer is anonymous. It's only ascribed to Luke by later church documents, usually 2nd century, that ascribe this to Luke. And there's many people that mention verses from Luke and Acts, but never attribute it to an author until much later. So actually, I think if you're really interested in the authorship of the Gospels, and a little bit, he does touch in this video a little bit about Acts, because it's related to Luke. Paulogia just really recently did a really good video that has good visual presentation and things like that, that really takes a deep dive. I'll link that above my head, and I'll put it in the description too, but it's a really good one, and hits all the bases very, very quickly. So it's written by an anonymous author. The title of Luke, the Gospel according to Luke, isn't added till like the 2nd century, and you don't really see it in manuscripts till the 3rd or 4th. So it's somewhat debated as to who wrote this. There's a lot of internal evidence to say that there's no way it was written in the 1st century, so there's some things in it, like predictions of the destruction of the temple, which don't appear in other places. So it's kind of one of those books. The book of Acts, however, continues the story, and it's addressed to a guy named Theophilus. Now, a lot of traditions claim that Theophilus was a real person, from a priest to a Roman official to an actual person. But there's also a tradition that was more my view, that Theophilus was just a reader, because the name means friend of God. And so he could be saying, my former trustee, friend of God is, and it just gets translated as a name, Theophilus. So the writer is basically saying, if you're a friend of God, you've already read my previous work in Luke, here's the rest of the story in the book of Acts. Much of the same criticisms that can be leveled at the gospel can be leveled at the Acts, the anonymous authorship, the fact that it's probably written later than the events described. It doesn't have any collaborating witnesses with it. That's probably its biggest witness. I mean, the Gospels at least have 4 of them. The book of Acts stands as a single entity, and so there's no, even inside the Bible, collaborating evidence is rather rare and often contradictory. Like some of the things that Paul describes in Galatians don't seem to happen in the book of Acts in the same way, so it's kind of a contradiction at times. But basically what you have is an author collecting stories. Okay, now in Luke, it's pretty clear that that writer used sources like Mark and Q and brought all this stuff together. And so when we get to Acts, we don't have a lot of other documentary theories because nobody else writes this stuff other than the writer of Luke Acts. So we don't have even the biblical criteria of 2 or 3 witnesses. We only have one witness that this is what happens. And we have no contemporary historical sources that verify anything in the book of Acts either. So it's basically really what you read in the book of Acts is for the Bible tells me so. There is no other real sources. Now we do know that Paul was a real person. We know that Peter was a real person, things like that. But, they attest to each other in some respects. But there's a lot of these events that happen are purely the testimony of, of one author who writes this down. So the question becomes, why is this so important to Pentecostals? Why is the book of Acts very much Pentecostals? Now, I've written a lot of literature, read a lot of literature about the Luke Acts connection, and there were several master's degree papers that were written at the time about how Luke has a charismatic theology. I think there's a master's thesis a guy wrote, The Charismatic Theology of Luke Acts. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but he wrote how there was this idea of the Holy Spirit and what the Holy Spirit does through both volumes. And I would say that he has somewhat of a point in the fact that there does seem to be a connection. But in the book of Acts, what Pentecostals do is that they hear the words of Jesus, and greater works shall you do because I go on to the Father. And they take that very literally. They really do also take the idea that if you had faith as small as a mustard seed, you could say to the mountain, be moved and cast in the sea, and it would be so. No mountains have been cast in the sea. So far, that count is 0. But Pentecostals believe that there's a real divine power that acts and works in the world. And because they do that, they look to the book of Acts as a way of justifying some of that faith. It is a basis of much of their belief system about the miraculous and how God can do things. Okay, and as a Pentecostal, one of the things that I very much believe is that God could still do things. One of the things for my former denomination, the Assemblies of God, and I think this is also true for Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee, and several others, is the doctrine of the initial physical evidence. It's not charismatic and Pentecostal theology doesn't come just from Acts, like it'll come from 1 Corinthians 12 through 14. Some of the sayings of Jesus, particularly in the book of John, lead into Pentecostal theology. But the big thing in Acts is this doctrine of the initial physical evidence of the infilling, the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And the baptism of the Holy Spirit is looking at a second or third work of grace, depending on how much holiness you have, where a person gets empowered by the Spirit to be a witness of Jesus Christ. And the evidence that you have been filled with the Spirit is you speak in tongues. Okay? Now, I've demonstrated on this channel before that anybody can speak in tongues. You just need to train, think about it, and just kind of let go. And I think anybody can do it. Many religions have speaking in tongues, so it's not a unique thing. And I just want to remind everybody that I can still do this. I'm not going to do it here today. It's just embarrassing to me anymore. But it's, I did it in my one video, which I'll link. Probably already linked above my head. Just kind of look at that, and you'll see what I think about that. The other thing in Acts is some church organizational structure, although 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus seem to do more of that, but the pastoral epistles. But there is kind of missionary methods, like Pentecostals very much are very missionary focused, and a lot of it is very much the book of Acts and the Great Commission. And they base the Holy Spirit aspect in missionary work because of the book of Acts and the way the book of Acts describes that missionary effort. And so they add that element into it. And so when Pentecostals go on missionary trips, they're not just preaching the gospel, they're also talking about being filled with the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues and having miracles take place. And so it's a real tent revival kind of atmosphere when you see missionaries working overseas, particularly in different places. So a lot of the missionary methods and how to be a missionary, you know, is part of that. And that kind of leads into the last thing of how Christianity spread. Okay, they make a very strong case that if the book of Acts is real, then this is real evidence of the truth of the gospel because of how quickly it spread. Now, I know for a fact that any religion can spread quickly if it has the right elements to it and can be convincing enough to the gullible. But they really feel that this is a Holy Spirit-led movement, and the Holy Spirit is the one that really proves it because it empowers people to speak in tongues and do miracles and heal people. And so they believe that that has a large part to the spread of Christianity in the early days. Now, of course, my evaluation of this is one of the things that drove me nuts is, well, I don't have any collaborating evidence for a lot of this in the Bible, so it fails the biblical test of 2 or 3 witnesses. There's no historical collaboration anymore for the book of Acts than there are the Gospels. It's anonymously written, so we have no idea if this person was actually an eyewitness. There's much made of the we passages in Acts as if the person was, and those passages take place when Paul is traveling. So the idea is whoever wrote this was a traveling companion of Paul. And it's there, but it's kind of flimsy evidence, really. Just because somebody says we doesn't mean necessarily what people are talking about, although it could be. All right. I, of course, after being a Pentecostal for so long and now coming to the assessment that I never really saw a genuine miracle, what I saw was a lot of tomfoolery. I saw a lot of fakery. I saw a lot of people ginning up people's emotions and getting people to think a certain way so that, they believe certain things. And so that doesn't necessarily lend itself to a lot of credibility with this. As a former Pentecostal, I did deal with the theology, but I came to the conclusion that, like, the doctrine of initial physical evidence had flaws. And so, because some of the accounts that are used to prove it don't actually say that that's what happened. Missionary methods maybe that worked back in the day when I was Pentecostal. So maybe that worked back in the day, but I don't think it works now because you don't really see a lot of this happening anymore. And so, does the church, work with miracles and fire and signs following? We'll see. I'm going to try to take this book maybe a chapter at a time, so it'll take a bit to get through, maybe a whole year. But I think you're going to be amazed at some of the things that happen in it and how Pentecostals view it. I'm really kind of enjoying going back and looking at how I looked at things back in the day when I was a theist and a Pentecostal. How I looked at this book then and how I looked at this book now is going to kind of be the subject of this. So hopefully you'll join me for this series, Tongues of Fire, Acts and the Pentecostals. And we'll see where it goes from here. But I hope you enjoyed the introduction. Like, share, and subscribe. Do the things that you do. You're making me very happy. This channel is growing very, very well. I'm hoping if we continue to speed up in our growth as far as watch hours, I may have ad revenue before end of November, maybe early December, which would be a really nice Christmas gift for me, and I will absolutely appreciate that, and thank you very much. So do the things you do, and once again, live your best life. You only get one go around, and then it's over. Pursue your own happiness, pursue your own success. Do the things that you do for yourself and the people that you love and the world that you live in. I think you'll be much happier. In fact, I know you will. I speak from experience than following the trappings and wasting your time, money, and energy with the trappings of religion and faith. You do you and live for you, because who else is going to do it? Thanks once again for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.